What I'm going to talk about today is voice AI orchestration and enabling this voice ecosystem that Lance sort of kicked off for us in this world where there's a proliferation of conversational AI devices and we talk to them and there's lots of investment in the enterprise. And my company consults primarily with large brands on this conversational AI ecosystem. And the promise remains undelivered, ultimately because this orchestration layer, or this ability for these conversational technologies to talk to each other, still hasn't been fully fleshed out. And that's the problem that we set out to solve at my company, Speakeasy AI, with our development team and our consulting practice. And even when we first launched, speaking of Lance sort of voice promise, we launched with the idea of deliver the promise of voice, finally. Now we talk about building experiences that customers will actually use. Key on actually. They'll actually use it and they'll love it. And Lance is also spot on in regards to the learning curve being low. And I would add to that, the learning curve is low for customers. The customers that interact, or the users that interact with voice technologies, I know we have Rebecca going about conversational design later, they can't play Jeopardy. They can't figure out how to ask the question in the right way to elicit the response that's required or that you've set up for them. And as I dive into this, we're also going to sort of see how that concept of insights over reports being key. So for us, we're trying to enable this environment where voice AI and the concept that we speak differently than we type can help enable the orchestration of all these disparate technologies and these siloed conversational AI systems to get to what you need. And we do that with a patent pending algorithm we call speech to intent. But I assure you today is not going to be a product pitch. So we're running into a wonderful time where this promise can be delivered. And it's not just that technology is evolving, but expectations and appetite has shifted. Most people, when they call IVRs in the last 5 years, have yelled agent. They just yell agent and they try to get to a representative. A lot of trust was broken down on that undelivered promise for conversational AI with the first sort of rung of voice automation technologies. But now suddenly people are willing to talk to things again. Whether it be Google voice search, whether it be how many voice assistants people are dealing with a month. And the idea that voice is the user interface now, people's expectations is to be able to talk naturally to things and arrive at an understanding and arrive at an outcome or an end game, is the new expectation that brands have to meet. So this provides a wonderful opportunity in that adoption curves are shifting drastically in regards to people's willingness and appetite to interact with conversational AI technology. Sorry, I have a whole gaggle of children doing Wi-Fi school at the same time, so my internet's a little slow. Now, at the same time, as Lance also pointed out, enterprises are already investing in AI. I'm sure everyone has seen these unpleasant logo slides that people throw out into different data stacks or marketing technologies or AI technology. Here's all the brands that operate in this space. And I just grabbed a couple for illustrative purposes, but it's too many to mention. There's a new AI technology or AI vendor popping up weekly. The amount of chatbots that Fortune 500 brands invest in for different siloed solutions, whether it be a sales and marketing chatbot over here, a social media chatbot over here, something to help call center agents over here, IVR, chatbots, RPA, IVAs, smart speakers, all of these investments are trying to do the same thing fundamentally. They're trying to understand customer conversations. The problem that we've run into that we're trying to solve with speech to intent is that these conversations are occurring in a vacuum and they're primarily utilizing one source or one methodology to arrive at that understanding. And that's just speech to text. And speech to text unto itself is a wonderful piece of technology, whether you attribute the gold standard being to Nuance or Google now, or Microsoft says their speech to text is human parity, which most speech to text, when you speak into the device to sort of send someone a text, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 95% accurate. But what we found when trying to do this orchestration to really understand the nuanced differences in the way people speak in regards to accents, and I have a horrible Philadelphia accent, or context, or emotion and tone and history of those interactions, that transcription alone inherently provides sort of this rote typing out what the utterance is and then pushing it somewhere. And that context and all of that intelligence that could be on the line from the moment you say hello is not available. So most ASR relies primarily on transcription. And most people, when they think about how am I going to enable conversational AI, whereas 3 to 5 years ago might have thought nuance, now they're thinking either Google or Amazon and Lex. And we went and tried to enable that. So I once worked at a company where we were a digital chatbot provider. And in digital solutions, you're just typing. You're typing all day long. Okay, typing to the customer, understanding intent, responding with an answer. When you try to take those text systems and bring them to conversational AI, what happens is tuning based on actual voice and audio is really difficult and cumbersome, especially when you're trying to do this orchestration that I talked about. So Google Speech to Text, fantastic solution for what it is, for transcription. But custom tuning and audio training is simply impossible. It's going to be behind the curtain of Google. They have all of the text transcriptions of, think about all of the technologies and the data stack. I dare to even try to describe the data that Google sits on. They're probably listening to me right now somewhere in my house. But these statistical models and these templates they've created are meant to understand without that context necessarily. They're really just transcribing as a court stenographer and then bouncing that record against a vast text dictionary, so much so that I think about staying at Marriott properties and being an SPG properly. When you say heavenly to a conversational AI system, if you're an SPG member, you know heavenly is what they describe their sheets and bed pillows as. And it's kind of a proper noun, and it kind of has a context and an emotional feel to it. And it also dictates how I feel as a rewards member. And understanding a conversation about heavenly compared to the vast dictionary of the way you can use heavenly, without that context, you're missing something. And for Amazon and Lex, there's some similar obstacles. Amazon is wonderfully invitive to have developers come and work on Alexa skills or have people deploy contact center in a box solutions. But it is that. It ultimately, in the ASR itself, there's a little bit more black box and it's a little more all in one box. So although you can create custom text vocabularies and custom flows, the audio tuning beyond looking for those keyword patterns is not going to be there. So for us, not using speech to text alone, because speech to text is part of our strategy, but not using it alone is not just about accuracy, it's about approach. And that approach, again, is trying to enable understanding of customers as they are, and in light of all of the context and investments that an enterprise has made. So what does that look like? Understanding customers in their own voice requires what we call orchestration. So as you're listening to the customer with your conversational AI solution, those audio patterns have to be listened to and understood in light of the context that you have. So voice tuning should know, based on this use case and based on these investments that we have, we know the customer is trying to have a conversation about specific hotel details, and not in light of, I hate to use the expression boil the ocean, but not in light of all of the knowledge in the world. This is a very specific conversation that needs to be had. So that understanding and that tuning or learning and creating a neural net and machine learning model that's going to create custom audio pattern matching has to be done within that context. So listening should have intelligence that incorporates these text patterns to sort of bootstrap a model, but all iterative learning should be based on that context and then incorporating audio and phonetic models. So that way you have true customization, and every interaction from a voice perspective is improving the language as opposed to waiting to have the intelligence on the line. And that also kind of sort of illuminates that insight versus reporting. In a world of reporting with AI, or in a world of transcribe and push to a system of intelligence, there's no element of sort of true understanding of that voice utterance from the beginning of the conversation. So what that means is, unlike speech to text alone systems, the conversation is not meant to just be transactional. It's not meant to just say, how do we get the response we were trying to get you to? But we're trying to get to a true, deeper understanding relative to this context that earmarks things like time, place, and audio insights, and that potential outcomes can be crafted more prescriptively. So when you truly understand your customers and you build an audio library that opens up the gateway to conversational AI, you might not be sure whether or not, let's say you've invested $2 million in a UiPath RPA flow that your call center agents are using to automate a billing inquiry. Whether or not you bring that to the line, you first need to understand if these are the types of inquiries that your customers are talking about at a true deep level and in a way that is providing insights in near real time. So for us, we're always trying to sort of, with speech to intent, map customer journeys based on how we understand them, and then figure out what we can bring into the puzzle in order to solve that, as opposed to that linear approach of, we have a stack of solutions, we have a stack of FAQs, we have a stack of bot content, we have all this self-service that we've invested in. Now we just need to figure out how to have the customer ask the right Jeopardy question and get them there. We'd rather build on top of that sort of true conversational AI understanding layer with speech to intent, and then start to orchestrate all of these existing investments you have. So what happens is we sit at the middle of the enterprise and create this AI huddle in a way that we sort of say is conversational middleware. AI at this point, in where things have gone in the last, Lance mentioned since 2016, there's now so much AI investment in the enterprise that AI needs to talk to AI, if you will, and not just AI. AI needs to sit in the middle, understand authentically the way a customer speaks in their own language, in their own voice, with their own tonality, and then understand the existing investments that have been made by the enterprise. So what exists in the CRM? To whom is the subject matter expert here? And that subject matter expert could be Rebecca, who's an agent. Sorry, Rebecca, just grabbing your name because you're first on my list. Or it could be for a specific Watson chatbot that was built a while ago that handles this specific IT help desk issue. Or it could be a dialogue flow conversation that we built for our live chat agents to help walk them through a mobile device upsell. If AI cannot talk to AI, you're constantly building these silos of conversational AI potential and never delivering the promise. So for us, what speech to intent enables is, and we probably need to think of a better trademarked word for this, but it's sort of pre-digested content. We're never taking just a plain transcribed utterance and pushing it somewhere. We're listening in light of this huddle that we've created, in light of this orchestration we're trying to enable. And so that when we go to retrieve an answer for a bot, and we'll stay bot as opposed to passing to a human, which we can also do, the utterance is pre-digested. And so when we use the API to say, hey, Watson, you're the expert here, help us with this conversation in voice, we're speaking Watson's language. Bot fluency is achieved. We're not going to Watson with transcription that may have broken or may have not been quite accurate based on the context of the conversation. So what speech to intent enables is a central, agile layer of voice intent. And a lot of these barriers around context or emotion or history or memory isn't there. Because what we don't want to do is learn via errors alone. And that's the way a lot of AI training has occurred to date, especially in self-service systems for customer care, customer support organizations like we consult with. It's errors help inform us how we're going to tune this and how we're going to improve these flows. And that's not the approach when you're starting with speech to intent, trying to orchestrate this ecosystem of conversational AI with understanding as the prime objective. So what does that mean from sort of how does that actually work in practice? And I'm going to sort of skin it with this is the way we see the world in our sort of assertion in our work with speech to intent, and then how it actually plays out in the customer use case. So again, traditional systems that rely on transcription alone and key being alone as the main mechanism for understanding, transcribes and reads the customer input, and then also pushes it along. So no custom audio phonetic pattern matching model is built. Whereas speech to intent, again, uses the customer's entire spoken voice, which includes the transcription that we've arrived at, which includes integration with additional bots that we're aware of, or CRMs, or voice biometric systems to know who the customer is, or sentiment analysis to know if they are angry or happy. And all of this is on the line from the beginning, so that when we decide where to go after the customer calls, and speech to intent hears that and knows all the knowledge and context, we're going to sort of play concierge and go to the right place to get that piece of information. And either way, whether or not that outcome is achieved, we're not going to disrupt the customer experience, because at the worst place, and I think Alec put it in the chat window, when you do want to speak to someone, you want to get to them as soon as possible, if it's time for a human. But we want to build, even from that conversation, this audio library to understand what customer intent was and how we can better match for the next time through. So speech to intent enables a neural net that isn't just creating transcription templates. I remember Google 2 years ago had sort of a template for every industry. Here's our insurance template. Here's our banking template. Here is our travel and hospitality template. The idea that because you can speak Citibank, you can easily speak Chase is something that people in the AI industry would sort of pitch back in 2016, 2017. But I would argue or assert it's almost malpractice in some ways, because the true holy grail of understanding is entities and entity extraction, sort of all those numbers, dates, proper nouns, and product names that really separate in the Venn diagram what makes Citibank differ from Chase. So that neural net, or those custom language models that you're building, although bootstrapped with some transcription that might be banking generic terms, must create tailored and custom audio and phonetic patterns that are related to what customers are asking specifically, and I'll use the example for Citibank again, for Citibank. And then if you can deliver all of these insights as you tune this model and as you interact with customers trying to understand them and provide it in real time, what you're doing is you're giving a different look at reporting. You're giving the enterprise the power to control and enable rapid updates to that understanding that then influence strategy that even exists outside the conversational AI system. So now we're looking at web content. Now we're looking at, well, what do we do in this experience when the person comes into a store, which I'm going to keep piggybacking off Lance. When Lance says, when a brand like Chase says we have $3 million to spend, they don't say we have it to spend on a chatbot. They say we have it to spend on experience in store, or experience for self-service, or customer retention, or customer adoption, or card servicing. They want happy customers. They want ease of insight acquisition, and then being able to react to that insights without sweeping everything out, without relying on just sort of that transcription approach where you're just transcribing everything and then having something else analyze it. We need that insight from the beginning of the conversation in AI. So what does that look like in an actual deployment with speech to intent? Here we have a use case for an enterprise hotel brand. This is an enterprise hotel brand that we consulted with, and they had a legacy IVR. And IVR is sort of the original voice AI system in some ways, calling into an automated voice prompt and getting your way down the sort of decision tree based flow. This legacy IVR, when a brand of this size is invested in a legacy IVR, it's time, it's money, it's pain related to infrastructure. It's not easy to say, well, let me just sweep that out for Amazon Connect. So I need to better serve my customers, but IVR is plumbing, and this is the plumbing I have. I'm not looking to replace all my plumbing. Ultimately, I also have RPA flows that I've invested in that help my agents manage their workflow, my human workforce. I also have digital AI investments. This brand in particular had 3 different chatbots. So 3 different chatbots, an RPA vendor, a legacy IVR, and also a homegrown CRM that we build ourselves, because no one knows our business like we do. No one knows how to serve our hotel customers like we do. Now make all of that work. To make all of that work in regards to understanding your customers and orchestrating a world where all of these investments can be leveraged in voice conversations with AI, you have to use speech to intent. You have to use a layer of understanding that enables something other than just transcribing everything and pushing it to the different systems. So what happens is, and this is a real call example from this deployment, customer calls in and says, I am missing points. And it's funny, I re-listened to this utterance earlier today, and I think there was a combination of things going on why it was transcribed. I miss it coins. I miss it coins and I'm missing points. You can almost see how it sounds alike. And this is a very rudimentary example to help drive home the point. But ultimately, when you think about transcription's accuracy, and I said before, it's essentially human parity when you're holding a device to your mouth and speaking to send that text to someone. But when you're calling someone and there's, without getting too into the weeds of telephony, whether it be speaker phones or whether it be just SIP to DTMF to PSTN, to the public switch telephone network, how you get from a call on your cell phone from those towers to that IVR, there's often fidelity and just sort of degradation to the voice quality that you don't really notice unless you're trying to listen for AI purposes. And so transcription caught, I miss it coins. But in this example, because we are bootstrapping a model on text that is aware of this hotel's RPA investments, digital AI investments, CRM, where customers have been, what customers typically talk about. And then we've built audio pattern models from that. Our speech to intent system says, we know you're talking about missing points. Every transcription system that relies on transcription alone would have broken there. And I use broken loosely. It would have just passed to an agent with, sorry, I don't understand, you repeat yourself. Here, there's enough of a confidence score, and I'm not sure if you can see, it's 83% or 0.83 confident that that's what the conversation is about. In our system, the way we use speech to intent, you can sort of create custom confidence throttles. So that way you only have a conversation when it's a certain level, and you can also customize that by use case. So talking about your point balance isn't as critical as maybe sort of a credit card fraud issue, and you can skin that differently based on that use case. But because we understand the context of the hotel's world, and we haven't bounced I miss it coins against a text library of everything in the world, we're able to arrive at that conversation, arrive at that understanding, and our language models improve, and all of that audio tuning improves based on the hotel and its customers. And then what we provide there is just a quick little screen grab of real-time insights that are actually looking at, based on these intents, what's the customer behavior? What are they trying to solve, and where are they going based on the specific intent? So for us, when we often deploy the speech to intent solution, again, we're not measuring accuracy in the terms of what was transcribed. We're measuring it in terms of, based on all we know and all the assets the enterprise has, in particular this hotel brand, how accurate are we at understanding truly the meaning of the customer's intent? And oftentimes we'll see sort of an 85% starting point, and then we'll go chase that extra 10 points, which is really where the exciting stuff is, and a lot of that entity extraction stuff is. It's trying to get that confidence score to a point where it's authentically demonstrating intent. So there's a lot there. So our contention is, when you try to enable a conversational AI ecosystem, which I feel like Lance did a tremendous job of laying that landscape out there. And this is the world we're in. Multiple devices, multiple siloed investments into different AI stacks, all trying to understand the customer, all creating different varied types of text-based language models that aren't speaking to each other. We feel like the only way to get in an enterprise environment for that true understanding is to use something like speech to intent that enables this orchestration and enables sort of this conversational middleware approach. So all in one box AI systems or transcription only models are going to be limited. There's only going to be so much customization, and they're going to be difficult to truly improve with machine learning that represents audio, that represents the way we speak and not the way we type, which is very different. And for some sort of brands or enterprises, that might be enough. But as customers' appetites and sort of, we talked about technology that you're dealing with on a daily basis changes drastically, it's not going to be enough to be understood only if I guess the right Jeopardy question. Whereas if you take this integration orchestration approach with something like speech to intent, with this conversational middleware approach, now you have that customization, you have improvement of insights that are unlocked across all of your investments. So when someone calls in, I know how it impacts every piece of content or every sort of RPA or AI initiative that I kicked off, and it helps me actually re-leverage things rather than reinvent the wheel every time I kick off a new AI initiative, which a lot of these do. So again, and I think I'm coming up to the top or to my stopping point. Our contention is that understanding with voice AI, true understanding, requires a speech to intent approach. This is the only way to get that centralized and agile voice understanding, and that provides authentic understanding. We want to put custom language models in place because that's when the customer and the user of these systems become the center of how we iterate and how we understand the customer. And AI training and improvement for voice is boosted by using contextual audio rather than just transcription and trying to sort of understand the text library of the world. So that's it. I hope this sort of branched well off of what Lance presented and helped give you some sort of perspective into what practitioners out there are trying to solve this sort of conversational AI orchestration and ecosystem challenge. And I think I'll stop there, Alec, and see if we have any questions.
Thank you very much. We had our first question from Chris. And he asked, what type of legal, policy, and privacy issues do you deal with when collecting audio to build out these intent models?
That's a great question. So a lot of it depends on the use case. It depends on the vertical. So if we're doing banking compared to travel and hospitality, depends on if we need to sort of take credit card information and be PCI compliant. So there's a variety of methods that we use, including sort of masking of numbers for certain use cases that we take depending on the use case. It's specifically specific in regards to what the customer is trying to achieve and what regulatory compliance guidelines we need to adhere to. And sometimes it does dictate that for certain flows, our language model from that audio and pattern recognition standpoint, what we're building upon, some of that data is not even going to be tracked or included because we need to mask it or we need to omit it from our model because we're storing some of that information. And then other times it's just related to sort of customer proprietary information just privacy guidelines that are more generic, like, okay, you can store it for X amount of time in your model and then you have to delete it. So it varies wildly based on who the customer is, the deployment use case, and even the specific conversation flow. So some flows might have less of that audio pattern learning sort of captured and retained compared to other use cases.
Thank you. We had another question from William. He was asking, how do you envision building out this type of technology for conversational AI as an ethical companion to inspire creativity, especially around building out kind of a more general speech to intent model where it's not in a specific domain?
Interesting. Yes. So for us, creating speech to intent and working with speech to intent was a means to an end. It was to get us to try and solve this problem of having multiple layered AI systems work in legacy voice technologies and a better way to understand customers and achieve sort of insights into what they're asking in real time. And what that means for us in regards to how that might inspire creativity or be an ethical companion to a person, we're not ourselves investing in those types of deployments and use cases. We are looking at having our speech to intent library be more open sourced and have people allowed to play with it. But right now it's primarily for our customers. The closest segue that I can sort of connect the dots with is we do have a call center agent assist component to our solution where when we're trying to understand a customer, it doesn't end when it arrives at the human. We essentially walk the call over to the human, if you will, and sit in the cubicle with the human agent and listen and provide agent assistance. So while we're listening to the customer and agent interaction, we're using speech to intent to say, hey, this article over in Zendesk, based on the intent that we pre-digest and based on that audio pattern, could help you serve this customer. And we actually interact with the agent in the background as well within a UI. So the agent can say, I actually don't like that article, but I like this one better. and learn based on that. But ultimately, that's the closest thing to sort of a companion solution. And I'm being a little bit loose and liberal there with connecting those dots. But as far as sort of a traditional, hey, we're a voice robot in the house kind of assistant companion device, we haven't approached that. And for me, I think it would be irresponsible for me to jump into the ethical considerations there.